Okay, everyone, welcome to today's NOBA Symposium. I'm very happy to see each and every one of you here. And I'm really excited and honored to be able to wish you all a warm welcome to this day of conversations and exchange. The topic that we've called Sensing Place, Decentralizing Knowledges, Making Soil Futures. This symposium brings together a range of voices that in various ways touch upon the theme of living soil and living with soil in particular places in very different contexts. And these places range from Palestine to northern Norway. And this is a constellation of perspectives that have emerged from the meeting of two different projects, the Anthropogenic Soils Project, based at the University of Oslo, in which NOBA, Norwegian Bioart Arena, is a partner, and the Soil Futures Project, which I'll get back to shortly. We have a really wonderful list of speakers lined up for you today. And looking out at this room, we also have a really diverse and interesting audience. So we hope that all of you embrace the format of the symposium, which is all about the conversations between groups of you. Informal exchange meetings over food. So please talk to the people at your table and reach out to others in the breaks if that feels natural to you. So one conversation starter and one way to keep your hands occupied while listening to our speakers is the soiling table format, which we've so far set up over there with some clay and pigments, so that throughout the day you are able to bring stuff to your table and keep your hands occupied, whether you would like to draw or to manipulate the clay into different shapes, to work a little bit with soil. You're encouraged to do so, but we will focus more on that after lunch. So for now, you can go over and have a peek, pick something up, bring it over. We will have an outdoor event before lunch featuring a lot of different soil and land engagements as well, and culminating in a spa session. So that is the main tactile element for this morning. So as I said, this symposium is the annual NOBA symposium, and NOBA, Norwegian Bioart Arena, is a department at Vitenparken campus Oslo, which is a science center dedicated to the environment, food and climate change, and we are here on the territory of the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. The symposium is an annual highlight here at NOBA. NOBA is the first permanent arena for bioart in Norway, and we organize art exhibitions, workshops, and events featuring Norwegian and international artists and scientists with a focus on the environment and topics related to the life sciences and agriculture and so on. The symposium is part of the program of the Anthropogenic Soils Project. And as I already mentioned, NOBA is a partner in the project, which is mostly based at the University of Oslo, led by Ursula Münster, who is here today, as are most of the soils team members. And two of them, Marianne Lien and Jean-Mi Joseph, will be speaking today. I'll say more about the program shortly, but first, just a few practicalities. Restrooms are out the door where you arrived, to your left. Should there be the need of fire escapes, there's an exit that way, of course, but also through the barn doors over there. There will be photographs taken throughout the day, so if any of you would not like to be represented on photographs, please let Elina, who is taking the photographs, know. You can also come to me and we can make the connection. And there is also a live stream, which is mainly for the purpose of the people who have not been able to be here, but really explicitly requested that we share the program with them. So we haven't shared the live stream link very widely, but we've provided it where necessary, just so you know that the event is also shared through those channels. Now, the original plan for today's program, until less than a week ago actually, was to start with a conversation among the partners of the network project Soil Futures, which was initiated by Arts Catalyst in the UK, as a collaboration between two Palestinian art organizations focused on agrarian and urban-rural contexts, Sakia and Rivak, and the Indonesian collective Struggles for Sovereignty and the South Italian art space Vessel. Bringing the Indonesians here was unfortunately out of our budget, but until very recently we had hoped we could bring one person from each of the Palestinian organizations, also after the escalation of the current conflict. But in the end it was too unsafe for the Palestinians to travel, and their absence is very sorely felt today. So they are with us in spirit and will also be represented through the presentation that Anna Santamauro is giving later today, and through the artist group Al-Wahat, who will be presenting their project, which is based on a residency at Sakia. Now, Anna also fell ill yesterday and couldn't travel, so she will be presenting online later today. So if you've looked carefully at the program, you will see it's been shifted around quite a bit, but all the program elements are still there. But we thought it's better to start with someone who is physically here in the space with us, so we've switched a couple of these program elements very last minute. And we'll start with what was planned as the end of the day, which is a lecture by Marianne Elisabeth Lien, followed by another conversation between Hilde Meti, Kristin Tornesvik, and Marianne. So, Marianne, I think you can slowly take the stage as I introduce you. Marianne Elisabeth Lien is a professor of social anthropology at the University of Oslo and part of the Anthropogenic Soils project, so a close colleague of mine. Her research concerns nature, human-animal relations, and the politics of food and landscapes. And Marianne has a long-standing interest in how lives are sustained through materials and food, tools, animals, and plants that constitute webs of relations that humans and other beings depend on, relations that are currently under threat. Marianne has traced the politics of food, from kitchen tables to fish farms, from agricultural production to modern marketing. And she's particularly interested in Arctic domestication and challenges of the Anthropocene, which we will be hearing more about from her today, and also the links between agricultural practices and colonization. So she will be talking about her work on Nordic Arctic colonization and understandings of the commons. Welcome, Marianne. You have half an hour for the presentation, and then we go into conversation mode.
Thank you so much.
Warm welcome.
I think I will begin by a small rearrangement of the stage. I'm apologizing for this, just to make myself comfortable, because you know it's all about how your eyes and your head and your voice works together. And for this to work for me, I'll do this. It's better for everyone. Good. So thank you so much for the introduction, Nora, and thanks for the chance to present you to this audience that we have not been in conversation, but I think this opportunity to present across from the social sciences, humanities to the arts and vice versa is really, really exciting, and I appreciate it very much. So, farming, and modernist farming especially, has a particular capacity to render other relations invisible. And indigenous relations to land particularly can be made invisible. A scholar called Hugh Campbell, in a recent book called Farming Inside Invisible Worlds, has made this point very clearly from the perspective of New Zealand, where his settler ancestors' farmland made Maori lands invisible. So I take these perspectives with me in my work in Finnmark, where I shall argue that nationalist ambitions of the Norwegian state strongly promoted modern agricultural practices and livelihoods for nearly a century. The imprint of this on the places and people in Finnmark is intensely present today if you look carefully. But I think you have to look carefully, because the story of Nordic Arctic agriculture, or Nordic Arctic colonization, which I will call it, is also a story of failure. It's a story of people who remade themselves reinvented their ancestral history, and rejected their parents' practices and modes of knowing in favor of a post-war narrative of prosperity and progress. And this remaking did not always go well. So that's going to be the topic of my talk. In my field, anthropology, we like to think, hold on, I need to just, here I can make the switch. Yes. We like to think that if we only stay long enough in places and gain the trust of local people, we will be able to tell good ethnographic stories. Stories that are true, somehow. Better stories, maybe. But I learned also, after I started working in coastal Finnmark nearly 40 years ago now, that it is not quite as simple as this graffiti painted on a house in Vardø, that everything is a story. Some stories are never told. Some things are simply not talked about. And some things are layered by other stories that get told instead. Other things, so that the memory of what happened gets erased, taken away. For example, that Sami identities are silenced, have been silenced, is now very well known. Becoming Norwegian enough could sometimes be a matter of keeping quiet and silencing prior practices and ancestry. And you know this, I'm sure. But practices of farming can be silenced too. Just like farming itself, the transformation of the soil can itself actively silence other modes of being in the landscape. So in this lecture, I will talk about how farming in the north has rendered other modes of being invisible through the transformations that I will refer to then as colonization through the soil. And I'll start with a story. About 7 or 8 years ago, my friend Vibeke, who lives in Varangerhalvøya near Båtsfjord, she called and complained that the Syltefjord Nature Reserve had been established right next to her house in Syltefjord, where she grew up, and that according to the new regulations, they could no longer fetch firewood like they used to. Now that is a problem in Finnmark, you can imagine. They had always fetched firewood in this birch forest, her father, her grandmother, and then her great-grandfather before that, like everyone else. The regulations seemed, of course, ridiculous to her. And we were like, what? We checked the website to see if it was actually true. And yes, it was true. And we found that the reasoning behind this is that, as you say here, the Syltefjord Valley Nature Reserve is protected to secure a nearly untouched deciduous forest area and tilnærmet urørt. Species are found here that exist at their absolute northern limit of the very margins of their habitat. We have to laugh, of course, because anything growing here is at the absolute northern limit of its habitat. This is a Barents Sea, and it's the North Pole next up. So that's funny and tragic at the same time. But the other part was really upsetting. Nearly untouched, she said. How could they write that? When this river valley of Syltefjord is where her grandmother had her outfields, that is utmarksslott in Norwegian, where they don't cultivate, but they go every year to cut. So that Gydeholmen was her Gyda grandmother name, and then there's Olaslotten, and that's Ola's place. So people knew where the places were, that they always went back to cut. And of course the sheep were grazing there in summer, the reindeer were there in summer, firewood was collected, of course, the branches were to cut to eat, salmon was fished, ptarmigan was snarefangst, snares, and all the other affordances of a landscape that made this valley viable for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So how stupid these biologists are to say that it is nearly untouched, right? But it's interesting to be erased by a public state website, right? It's an interesting experience, not so nice. So we decided to kind of push back a little bit, to look more closely at the history of the valley together. And then this story took another turn for me. So as we walked this valley together, and I began to be really interested in the details of it, and marked the sites where people had cut the grass and so on, gathered winter fodder, Vibeke pointed to a flat area, and she said, "This is moon." Moon, in Norwegian. Moon? What is moon? I said, "Well, that's where my father plowed. That's his field." "What? Plowed?" I had known her father for about 10 years until he passed. But I never knew he was a farmer. And by the time we had met, he was retired. But why didn't I know this? How strange that it was never mentioned. It was not as if the story was completely hidden either. This photo on their living room wall in Syltefjord from around 1957 or 58 was still up on the wall there. I had had coffee in this room so many times. But you know how you don't see the tapestry and sometimes you don't see the photos. I just never noticed. Later I learned that when this photo was taken, the horse here would soon be shot. A new era was underway, and Bjarne, who poses here on the hay wagon, poses for the photographer, was actually busy this time writing letters to the authorities to get subsidies and loans, or subsidized loans for the new tractor. His barn was brand new, and his hopes are intertwined with the agronomist's promise of the virtues of artificial fertilizer and ploughing and tractors. Bjarne was the first one to acquire a tractor in Syltefjord, and he would soon increase his flock of sheep. He already had sheep inherited from his mother, so he would increase the flock of sheep every year from this moment onwards throughout the 1960s, and therefore also his taxable income. So now I think of this photo as a snapshot of social change frozen in time. There's all these hopes in this picture. And yet it was invisible to me, just like this. This is the plow outside their house, practically outside the door, or I mean like 10 meters away from the door. How strange that I just walked past it. Maybe I'm not so interested in things like that, but you know, it's like someone just left it there and then it got stuck, and like, why is it there? It's deep in the ground, in the soil. How many hints does an ethnographer need to grasp what is straight in front of you in plain sight? You can wonder, or is it just me? I don't know. So we continued this journey together, Vibeke and I, and then after some time, maybe a year or two, Vibeke found this collection of photos. They were already carefully assembled by her father or mother, maybe, about 10 years after this previous picture, in the late 1960s. So, this is Moen that she talked about. This is it. If the previous photo of Bjarne was a story of hope, this is a testimony of accomplishment. It is a story of success. So far, so good. 1968, 69, or something like that. But then it all failed. The alfalfa that you see here nicely to dry on the what you call it in English, I don't know, the racks or whatever, is alfalfa. And it grew tall for a few years, and then it grew hardly at all. It completely failed very quickly then. And we should not be surprised, at least Vibeke wasn't, because she showed me the topsoil. If you dig down in this ground now, it is this thin. It's like hardly any soil at all. It's a lack of soil practically. And this is also 71 degrees north. This is the Arctic, if you do the normal way of calculating Arctic as a summer temperature of average less than 10 degrees in July, which is one way of measuring the Arctic. This is certainly the Arctic. So this field is not a field, really. It should never have been plowed. Bjarne's life effort was based on false promises. His health never recovered. It was a lot of work. He did it all by himself. And when I met Bjarne and his wife Anna in the 1980s as elderly couple, they had moved to Båtsfjord. They'd moved away from this place, like everyone else. The school had long been closed in Syltefjord. This had become a deserted village on the coast, like also many other villages in Finnmark at the time. His back never healed either. And so I wonder still about how to tell this story well, how to tell it as a better story. So rather than an individual failed project, this is, I think, a story of the rise and fall of agriculture in the Arctic North. It only makes sense in light of a much broader historical moment of agricultural promotion in the Nordic Arctic, or what I then refer to in the title of this talk as a colonization through the soil. And I learned this from then starting to follow various leads from the Varanger Peninsula and different places, such as south to the Pasvik Valley in Sør-Varanger kommune, Sør-Varanger municipality. So let's go there. And by the way, I worked with Charlotte Ulvang Larsen, who's also present with us today. Where are you, Charlotte? There. We work together here in this archive, which is why I know some of this, which is coming now. So this is Svanhovd, built in the 1930s and located in the middle of the Pacific Valley, tucked between two national borders, Finland to the west then, and Soviet Union to the east. You're surprised to hear that Finland is west of Norway, but it is in this particular part of Norway. The monumental size and architectural style are testimonies to the colonizing ambitions of the Norwegian state. This is an unusual building for this part of the country, and it's particularly unusual in the 1930s. Under the firm leadership of its first director, Sverre Mosling, Svanhovd soon became the center of coordination for an ambitious state-funded program that aimed to transform marshland or marshes and tundra to fertile agricultural fields, to be parceled to people through favorable loans and subsidies as plots of land then for prospective Norwegian farmers. This is referred to as bureising in Norwegian, and it took place in many other parts of Norway too. But what makes Pasvik special here is not only its top-down coordination through this kind of center and its massive scale, which I could talk more about, but not so much now. What makes it special is the way in which geopolitical and agricultural ambitions were entangled from the start. So I'll talk a little more about that, but I'll just introduce you to the area. This is kind of what it looks like in the Pasvik River. This other, what you see here, is actually Russia. That's how close it is. In an article in the magazine Ny Jord, New Soil from 1930, Sverre Mosling describes his first encounter with the Pasvik Valley as follows. This is, like he was very excited, he had just arrived from the south of Norway. This is where the Norwegian state had sent us to set in motion the biggest colonization plan this country has ever seen. There were vast areas to overcome, wet plains as far as the eye could see. Often I had to climb tall pine trees to get an overview of the terrain. And I have to confess that once I managed to get to the top, I often remained there perhaps too long, beholding the lovely panorama. So here's a completely picturesque affinity effect with the land, but also a strong will to transform it at the same time. It's a paradox, but it is what Finnmark is often about. Because people from the south, they know how to make it better, often. So what sort of problems was this project meant to solve for the Norwegian state? Because one thing is to have ambitions to transform something, but another is to fund a lot of money in the 1920s and 30s into a project like this. So, partly, bureising in Pasvik is a response to food shortage and poverty at the time. It is an example, and it took place, as I said, in many other places. But it was also a geopolitical issue. So the Pasvik Valley became the target for the Norwegian state's ambitions to ensure a settled border population with called ensure a border population with Norwegian sentiments, that is, med norsk sinnelag, in the part of Norway that was already very, can we say, multi-ethnic. It's always been mixed. It's called Tre stammers møte, or it's called all sorts of things in this area, because there are Sami, there are Finnish, there are Norwegian, sometimes there are also Russian speakers, and this has been the way it's always been. And this, in Pasvik especially, they spoke Finnish at the time, but that wasn't okay. So they wanted to ensure that there was a more Norwegian population in this area. And previously there had been East Sami or Skolt Sami nomadic people who had then, in the 1800s, for border geopolitical reasons that I cannot go all into, they had become Russian or Soviet citizens, Russian citizens then, and then they could not go across the river that I just showed. They had to be on the east side of the valley, and they could no longer be in this area. So they had kind of disappeared, nearly disappeared from the valley, not completely. And then it seemed open, and then Finnish immigrants had come up from the south because of famine in Finland and started to do a small-scale agriculture there. And that's the situation in 1920s, when it seemed like it was not Norwegian enough. So you have to create some plots of land so the Norwegian farmers could come and settle. Forget about the Finnish. Okay? The geopolitics here is really interesting. Norway expected that the Finnish would be really expansive and maybe make a war and take back Pasvik, but that never happened. Anyway, making Finnmark fit for farming was really hard work. Drainage ditches or canals, kanaler på norsk, had to be built in order to dry the land and make it fit for the plow. Because the fields you see here on the left picture look like a wonderful, nice agricultural field. There's just like here in Os. But of course it was not like that. It is extremely different. The land is extremely different. The Pacific Valley may have been beautiful for musling, but it's also very wet. And musling's task, among other things, was to evaluate the valley's potential as an agricultural resource according to specific scientific criteria that he had learned here at Os. Having assessed the land from the treetops and on the ground, he described marshlands that were, in places, he says, impenetrable, jungle-like scrubs, not at all suited to agriculture. You can imagine this where you always have to have a gummistövler, like, you know, you get wet, your feet get wet if you don't have boots. But as in other cases of agricultural colonialism, such challenges are overcome by like transformations. And with soil samples and careful mapping, Mosling identified 3 types of marshes that could be used for agriculture. And he named them and he mapped them and everything. And the next step then was to drain this marshland, or the marshes, to drain it, to take the water away. And this is what you see on the picture to the right from the 1930s. Shovels, picks, and manual labor were not always enough, though, to civilize the land. The wet soil escaped the shovels. You can imagine when you dug in wet soil, it's like, you know, it can't get the shovel up, and it's like it pulls down. And the roots, of course, a very intense meshwork of roots from the small trees and shrubs resisted being cut, of course. So to speed up the process here, dynamite was used. And like huge explosions out enabled them to dig these canals. So by the 1930s, nearly 50 kilometers of drainage ditches were already crisscrossing the landscape. In the following years, from 1930s, many, many more kilometers were built of this thing. So the whole Pacific landscape around where the main roads are is crisscrossed by such ditches. And you can imagine what remains is a much drier landscape that kind of looks like agricultural land. Just as the land turned out to be somewhat disappointing and difficult, according to Mosling, so were the people. This photo is from a book in the archive in the basement at Svanhovd, shows a kind of ideal version of people, what we try to achieve here, of fields and folks from the late 1930s. But of course, this is a very styled photograph, just like the one you saw from Bjarne. Most people were not like the ones who posed for this photo. Here is, to the right, Jonjok in Syltefjord from 1922, but we can imagine people were more like this. The turf hut in the background of the picture to the right indicates people of Sami descent. These were kinds of people who lived in this region, but also Finnish immigrants who had small farms. So as I've indicated, this massive project of agriculture cultivation was also a civilizing project. And my argument here is that there is a dark affinity between the cultivation of land and the cultivation of people. More precisely, bureising implied irreversible transformations of marshy land, wet land, but also more subtle forms of dispossession of local people's livelihoods, and maybe we can say dignity. According to Mosling, and I cite, only Norwegians of pure descent should be allowed to have land in Finnmark. That's a strong thing to say in a place like Finnmark. The problem was that they were not easily found, these people of pure Norwegian descent in Finnmark, which is a very mixed population. And if they were found, they were hard to recruit. Especially, he had to look south to recruit them from places like here or Trøndelag. But that was really difficult because, you know, it didn't seem like a good idea to be farming in Pacific if you came from Trøndelag or Os. The local people were more interested in staying there, of course. But according to Mosling, the local people here were unfit, as they, and I cite again, they lacked the most elementary notions of the use of soil and manure. They lacked the most elementary notions. And, cite again, could hardly feed a cow. Well, there had been cows here, but Instead, they, and I cite, roamed around the meadows, harvesting meager turfs of grass, he wrote. In other words, they did exactly what Vibekes grandmother had done, Gyda, and in what is now the Fyltefjord Valley Nature Reserve. They used utmarksslott and cultivated outfields, which has been key to sheep husbandry in this region for a long time. So how did they do it? How did they manage before this wonderful Sverre Mosling ideas came? Well, there were always sheep, I said here, because we have to remember that agriculture did not arrive here in the 1930s. There are at least 800 years records of sheep in this region. I often wonder, like, how did they feed them? You know, there's a lot of snow, a lot of the year. The photo to the left is from Syltefjord around 1920. The one to the right is from a couple of years ago, and I took it, and you know, it's almost exactly the same. Sheep are going down to Fjæra, to the coast during the winter, and the left picture during the winter. Now they are in the barns in the winter and are fed hay, cultivated hay. But anyway, they are not. It's not strange for them to be marine feeders in a way. Seaweed was an important supplement to cut grass. But branches and hay also in an economy that utilized practically everything that is here. They knew how to use the land. They knew so much. And I think we have forgotten a lot of this. And I'm in the process of trying to retrieve some of this knowledge together with others, but it's hard work too. Just some examples. This is Søl, or Palmaria palmata, which was fed to cows and sheep in the spring before they had a calf. Or, according to Vibekes grandmother, it was a remedy against inflammation in the udder, like jurebetennelse, as well as to give the lambs because they could have inflammation on their feet. Søl was gathered outside Jonjok, for example, in Syltefjord at low tide, and stored in the snow during winter because, you know, you could keep it in the snow like a fridge. And then fed a little bit to the animals, and it's very rich in vitamins and minerals, we know. To the right here, you see a picture of what we call in Norwegian fjøsgryte, the barn cauldron. And it was indispensable. It was a part of the barn, in every barn in Finnmark about 100 years ago. It was like, this is it. This is the infrastructure for feeding animals. What did they make? They made løyping. I can't translate it. It's a kind of soup consisting of whatever. All kinds of grass and branches, as well as fish bones, fish heads, and other leftovers that could feed the animals. And Ottar Brox wrote, "De slo alt som vokste." They cut everything that grew. And then he lists all these things that grew. You know, it's rain moss, it's branches of all different trees, and it's different kinds of seaweed. It's leaves, everything. This is a little pamphlet, Vinterfôring in Nord-Norge, from the 1950s, late 1950s. It's a pushback against people, against agronomists from Os, who had identified a problem in the north, sultefôring. And they thought that they were absolutely doing it wrong up here, and so there was a lot of effort to try to teach them to do it well. But then Ottar Brox, coming from Senja in the north, in Troms, pushed back and said, they actually are able to feed the animals, even if, when you visit in November, the barn is not full of hay, and it looks like they're not going to have enough feed. But you know what? They have other ways. And so they will be fishing, and they will be giving them a løyping suppe, will be giving them branches. Another woman I know, she says how her mother had to fetch, during summer, 500 sånne bunker, hva heter det? Well, how much branches of birch can you carry down from the hillside? If you are a 12-year-old girl, well, as much as you can carry. If that's one, she had to fetch 500 of them during a summer. Okay? That was the work of children. That was to feed the cows. No, to feed the sheep. So angelica, bark, grass, leaves, seaweed, whatever. But the agronomists at the time felt that this was not sufficient, and that this practice that we showed was totally out of sync with the modernist vision of agriculture. I want to give you just a glimpse of the general scientific ideas at the time coming out of this institution here. This is I'm going to show you some excerpts from a trial lecture from 1957, presented here at the Agricultural College in Os. And I'm going to give it in Norwegian. I'll translate a little bit. Her name is Dagmar Sivertsen. They were just using surrogates to feed the animals, she says. It was terrible winter feed. There was sylteforing, starvation feeding of the animals. Well, most of this region is at the Sami and the Kven's low level of education. And yeah, this is a complicated thing. An agronomist appears like a luxury here because there are no agronomists here to repair this. And the care for the animals is characterized by lack of knowledge and contingency. It's shocking forms of animal abuse. And the gomme, the turf hut that I showed you on the picture, was so terribly equipped that it was almost like a torture chamber for animals and people. That's nice to know. Even so, and this is a selective excerpt here because I could have made another. She actually has hopes. She actually says that it's strange enough they still survive some of these animals, and she is not completely negative, and she concludes that agriculture could have a future in certain parts of Finnmark on the conditions that fields are plowed and modern husbandry methods are applied. But in order to achieve this, a complete transformation of local attitudes is necessary. And I'm going to move very quickly now. So I'm just putting up quickly this definition of a settler-colonial relationship. I'm not going to read it to you, but I think that this is a settler-colonial relationship. Let's talk about colonization in Norway, in the north. We don't like to think about this because it hurts a little bit for those of us who come from the south. But we, in another paper with Frida Hastrup, I proposed the term welfare frontiers to denote the kind of colonial expansion that happens in the Nordic countries, because it's a different kind of colonization from the North Americas. It is in the name of the common good. It is the state doing this for everyone. It doesn't want to exclude the Sami from having a good life, but they need to transform themselves and become like us, okay? So it's not like massacre, but it's like just become like us. Post-war progress, a common good for all, on the condition that you change. Some people had to change before they could be considered. That's a very quick rendering, but I don't have much time to do the argument properly. So, cultivating land and people, in order to get from there to there, you need folkeopplysning. And this is just a small collection of the pamphlets that I've been referring to already, and there are more of them, also in Sami, all the advice they needed to understand this, and it's another talk in itself. It's unlikely that Bjarne read Dagmar Sivertsen's prøveforelesning. I don't think he read the trial lecture, but he got the idea from agronomists who had learned from the same institutions that this is how to teach people to live. And he learned well. So now I'm coming to an end. This is the field Moen 2 years ago, in the fall, in October. And we have been trying to trace like exactly where, it doesn't look like a plowed field. It doesn't look like the same black and white photo you just saw, does it? But that's how nature grows back. But we have been wondering exactly like where was it delineated, like where did it grow, where did it not grow, and they've been looking for small traces in the landscape, like rusty metal and so on. We find a lot of rusty metal there, and old frying pans and so on. But then we walked, we couldn't really see the delineation of the field, so we walked up the hill you see to the left here, and we started walking across the field to see it from above, and all of a sudden, boom, this unfolds right in front of us in the day in October. So plants are opportunistic creatures. They know the soil intimately, and therefore I think that landscapes recall and reveal what people prefer to keep hidden from you. Landscapes are relational archives, is what we work with. Material forms are dynamic and changing, just like people. So this snapshot, I think, is visible. The straight line you see is visible only at a particular time in the fall, when the different plants go red at different times. In the summer, it's all green. So plants remember what people try to forget and help to remind us anthropologists what a colleague, Tess Lee, in Australia describes as follows: the shifting conditions of possibility and hope that are physically present in the field but often escape our ethnographic attention. So that's what I think we can continue to look for and work with and together. And I think artists have a particular role to convey some of the history that is difficult to talk about, both for people in the north and in the south. Thank you.